Movie acting is my favorite, and I did a lot of TV, 20 years on stage, and it was fun, but it didn't hit that button.
Hated Mostin, the 7 actors Morgan Freeman refused to work with again. nnhttps://www.youtube.com/watch?v equals OVP 7J Joel-Cohen. Eddie Murphy. When you hear the names Morgan Freeman and Eddie Murphy in the same sentence, you might imagine a perfect storm of talent. The calm, commanding authority of Freeman's voice paired with Murphy's larger-than-life. On paper, the duo could have been magic, but in reality the collaboration was anything but harmonious. What was supposed to be a creative spark quickly turned into one of Freeman's deepest professional disappointments, one that left him vowing never to work with Murphy again. Freeman is the definition of discipline. He treats acting like a sacred craft, an art form that demands precision, preparation, and respect for the crew who work tirelessly behind the scenes. He arrives on set, with every line studied, every motivation explored, and every emotional beat mapped out like a master chess player planning 5 moves ahead. To him, film isn't just entertainment, it's a responsibility, a promise to the audience that their time, their money, and their emotions won't be wasted. Eddie Murphy, however, was the polar opposite. Known for his improvisational genius, Murphy built his career on spontaneity. His stand-up comedy, his breakout roles in Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America, all of it thrived on energy, unpredictability, and charisma that couldn't be contained by a script. But while that style may have electrified audiences, it clashed violently with Freeman's world of order and precision. And crew members who worked on the project that brought them together recall the tension vividly. Freeman would be in his chair, lines rehearsed, ready to shoot. Then he would wait. And wait. And wait. Eddie Murphy had a habit of arriving late, sometimes hours late. And when he finally showed up, he often treated the script like a rough suggestion rather than a roadmap. Instead of rehearsing, he wanted to improvise, to play with dialogue, to chase laughs in the moment. To Freeman, this wasn't just unprofessional, it was disrespectful. One crew insider described Freeman's frustration in unforgettable terms. You could see his jaw clench every time Eddie strolled onto set unprepared. Morgan's not the kind of guy to blow up at people, but you could feel it. The tension, the quiet storm brewing underneath. Freeman tried to keep the peace, at least at first. He stayed professional, avoided arguments, and kept his emotions under control. But behind the scenes, his patience was thinning. He stopped engaging with Murphy off camera. No casual conversations, no friendly meals, no laughter between takes. What had once been imagined as a dynamic partnership dissolved into silence and strained professionalism. NTHE breaking point came during a pivotal scene. Freeman, ever the perfectionist, offered a subtle suggestion to elevate the emotional weight of the moment. Rather than listening, Murphy brushed him off with a smirk, calling Freeman's approach too old school. For an actor who had spent decades perfecting his craft, for a man who viewed acting as a sacred duty, that dismissal was the ultimate insult. Freeman didn't lash out. He didn't yell or walk off set. That wasn't his style. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He finished the project with grace, collected his paycheck, and made a decision that would quietly echo across Hollywood. He would never work with Eddie Murphy again, and true to his word, he didn't. In an industry where egos often clash and reconciliations happen when money is on the line, Freeman drew a firm boundary. To him, respect for the craft outweighed box office potential, and no amount of comedic genius could justify working alongside someone who treated the process so carelessly. It's almost tragic when you think about it. The potential of Freeman and Murphy together, squandered by a difference in philosophy. But it also reveals something crucial about Morgan Freeman. His career has never been about chasing fame or riding the coattails of another star. It has always been about integrity, about honoring the story, and about making sure the work reflects his values. NFOR Eddie Murphy, the world kept laughing. For Morgan Freeman, the laughter wasn't worth the disrespect. And that's why their paths, once crossed, would never cross again. If Eddie Murphy represented chaos through improvisation, Russell Crowe represented chaos through anger. Hollywood has long whispered about Crowe's notorious temper, explosive outbursts, confrontations with crew, and a reputation for being difficult. But when that combustible personality collided with Morgan Freeman's calm, disciplined presence, the result was a working environment so toxic that Freeman vowed never to share the screen with him again. Russell Crowe, at the height of his fame, was considered one of the greatest actors of his generation. From Gladiator to A Beautiful Mind, his performances were fierce, raw, and unforgettable. But behind that brilliance was a man who often treated film sets like his personal battlefield. Shouting at crew, belittling colleagues, even openly dismissing directors, it was part of the legend of Crowe, and not in a good way. Morgan Freeman, on the other hand, could not be more different. His reputation was built on quiet dignity, on treating everyone, from the studio head to the catering staff, with the same respect. To Freeman, a film set was a collaboration, a delicate ecosystem where every voice mattered. That's why Crowe's behavior wasn't just frustrating, it was intolerable. Insiders who witnessed the two men together described the atmosphere as suffocating. Crowe would dominate the room, barking orders and humiliating crew members in front of everyone. Freeman would remain silent, his face unreadable. But those who know him say the silence was filled with judgment. He despised disrespect more than any other flaw, and Crowe seemed to embody it daily. NTHE breaking point didn't happen during filming. It happened during promotion. In an interview meant to celebrate the project, Crowe made a cutting remark that Freeman would never forget. He dismissed Freeman's acting style as old-fashioned and predictable, suggesting that the veteran actor was coasting on reputation rather than bringing real intensity to his performances. NFOR Morgan Freeman, who had spent 6 decades refining his craft with meticulous care, this wasn't just criticism. It was an insult to his life's work. And yet, in typical Freeman fashion, he didn't fire back. He didn't sit down for a tell-all interview or start a public feud. Instead, he chose a weapon far more powerful in Hollywood: silence. From that moment on, Freeman drew a quiet red line. Casting directors who tried to pair them again were met with a firm refusal. As one insider put it, if Russell's name was on the project, Morgan wasn't interested. No discussion. No negotiation. Just no. It was a devastating blow to Crowe's career opportunities. While many actors might swallow their pride and look past bad behavior if the paycheck was big enough, Freeman's integrity was unshakable. His message to Hollywood was clear. No amount of box office revenue could make up for disrespect. One casting director later revealed just how absolute Freeman's stance had become. "We had a role tailored for Morgan, and the studio wanted Russell too. We reached out to his team and the response was immediate. If Crowe's attached, Morgan's out. That was it. Door closed." What makes this feud even more striking is how different the two men's careers played out afterward. Freeman, who refused to compromise on dignity, remained one of the most respected and in-demand actors in the industry, well into his 80s. Crowe, despite his immense talent, saw his star power fade as stories of his temper overshadowed his artistry. It's a sharp reminder of how Hollywood truly works. Talent gets you noticed, discipline keeps you working. But respect for others, for the process, for the people around you, is what sustains a legacy. And Morgan Freeman has built a legacy stronger than any single performance. NFOR Freeman. Russell Crowe's outbursts weren't just noise. They were proof that some actors believe their talent excuses their behavior. Freeman disagreed. To him, greatness isn't just about what you deliver on screen. It's about how you treat the people who help you get there. And in that measure, Crowe failed completely. That's why, in Morgan Freeman's book, Russell Crowe is permanently blacklisted. Kevin Costner has always been one of Hollywood's most polarizing figures. On one hand, he is the quintessential American leading man, the rugged face of films like Dances with Wolves, The Bodyguard, and Field of Dreams. On the other, he has carried a reputation for being headstrong, demanding, and often clashing with co-stars and directors alike. For Morgan Freeman, that second side of Costner left a permanent mark. NTHE's story begins in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a time when both actors were climbing to the absolute peak of their careers. Costner had become Hollywood royalty almost overnight, his boyish charm and quiet intensity captivating audiences. Freeman, meanwhile, was building his empire of respect, slowly, steadily, and with unmatched grace. When the two men were paired together, the industry buzzed with excitement. This was supposed to be the collaboration of giants. NBUT, what looked promising on paper quickly soured on set. And Freeman, ever the consummate professional, valued punctuality, preparation, and above all, humility. He believed in the ensemble nature of filmmaking. No star was bigger than the project. Costner, however, reportedly approached the process differently. He carried himself as though he were not just the lead actor, but the director, producer, and creative visionary rolled into one. Multiple crew members from their time together described how Costner would frequently override decisions, insisting on changes that often had little to do with performance and more to do with ego. And Freeman, with his quiet but commanding presence, absorbed much of it in silence. But silence, in Freeman's world, is never neutral. Those who know him say he watches, he evaluates, and he remembers. NTHE's most infamous moment between the two came during a heated disagreement about screen time. Costner, protective of his leading man status, allegedly pushed for edits that minimized Freeman's role, even though the script had been designed to showcase both men equally. In one version of events, Freeman discovered whole scenes cut down, not for pacing, not for narrative necessity, but to ensure Costner remained the shining star. NTHET was the final straw. Freeman, who had fought for decades just to be recognized in a white-dominated Hollywood, saw Costner's maneuver not just as ego, but as erasure. His philosophy had always been that cinema was about the story, not the star. Costner's actions violated that principle in the most personal way possible, and after the film's release, their professional relationship ended abruptly. Hollywood insiders whispered that Freeman had quietly blacklisted Costner, refusing to even consider projects where their names might intersect. When asked years later in an interview about working with difficult actors, Freeman didn't name names, but he said something telling, "Sometimes the hardest people to work with are the ones who think the film is about them. It's never about them, it's about us." NTHOs who knew the history didn't need to guess whom he was referring to. NTHE aftermath was stark. Freeman continued to thrive, evolving into one of Hollywood's most respected elder statesmen. Costner, though still beloved by many fans, saw his career swing wildly between blockbusters and flops, often weighed down by reports of his controlling nature. And yet, what makes this blacklist especially fascinating is Freeman's consistency. He wasn't a man who blacklisted easily. He believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility of change. But when it came to Kevin Costner, the betrayal ran too deep. It wasn't just about clashing personalities or creative disagreements. It was about principles. Freeman believed in respect, fairness, and balance. Costner's behavior, in his eyes, crossed all three lines. NFOR Freeman. Costner wasn't just another difficult actor. He represented the arrogance of Hollywood itself. And so, just as he had done with Eddie Murphy and Russell Crowe, Freeman closed the door. Quietly. Permanently. Without a single word of public drama. In Morgan Freeman's Hollywood, there was no room for inflated egos who put themselves above the story. That's why Kevin Costner, for all his star power, joined the ranks of those silently exiled from Freeman's circle of trust. If Morgan Freeman despised ego in the form of Kevin Costner, what he found in Charlie Sheen was something entirely different. Chaos. Where Costner was controlling, Sheen was unpredictable. And for Freeman, unpredictability on a film set wasn't just irritating, it was dangerous. Charlie Sheen, the son of Hollywood veteran Martin Sheen, burst onto the scene in the 1980s with Platoon and Wall Street, instantly branded as a rising star. He was young, handsome, and seemingly destined for a legendary career. But as the years went on, his talent became overshadowed by his off-screen scandals, drugs, alcohol, affairs, arrests, and erratic behavior that earned him the title of Hollywood's bad boy. And Freeman, a man who treated film sets with the sacred discipline of a cathedral, saw in Sheen everything he despised about celebrity culture. To Freeman, a movie set was a place where hundreds of people, from camera operators to caterers, gave their sweat and time to make a vision come to life. When an actor showed up unprepared, late, or intoxicated, it wasn't just unprofessional. It was a betrayal of every single person working behind the scenes. And that's exactly what Freeman witnessed with Sheen. Rumors circulated about a project in the early 1990s where Freeman and Sheen, nearly crossed paths. Sheen's erratic behavior had already made him a nightmare for directors and co-stars, and Freeman, after hearing the reports firsthand, made it abundantly clear he would never share the screen with someone so reckless. The difference between Sheen and other actors on Freeman's blacklist was striking. With Eddie Murphy, the clash was stylistic. With Russell Crowe, it was temper. With Kevin Costner, it was ego. But with Charlie Sheen, it wasn't about clashing personalities. It was about survival. Freeman believed that Sheen's instability put the integrity of the entire production at risk. He didn't just refuse to work with Sheen, he openly cautioned others in private circles to steer clear as well. There's one story often whispered among industry insiders. During a charity gala in the mid-1990s, Freeman was reportedly seated near Sheen. The younger actor arrived late, clearly intoxicated, and spent much of the evening cracking crude jokes and interrupting speeches. Freeman, dignified as ever, didn't confront him publicly, but later, when asked privately what he thought, Freeman's response was sharp and chilling. "That young man is an accident waiting to happen. I don't want to be anywhere near it when it does." And he was right. NBY the 2000s, Sheen's public meltdowns had become legendary. His infamous fallout with 2.5 Men producers, his bizarre interviews declaring himself to have tiger blood and Adonis DNA, and his endless legal troubles turned him from a leading man into a walking tabloid headline. While some found his antics entertaining, Freeman saw them as the tragic unraveling of wasted talent. NTO Freeman, Sheen wasn't just irresponsible, he represented the dark side of Hollywood, where fame and fortune consumed discipline and respect. And if Freeman's blacklist had a hierarchy, Sheen wasn't near the middle, he was right at the top. What's remarkable is how Freeman's prediction of Sheen's downfall proved so accurate. Where other feuds may have been about bruised egos or creative clashes, Freeman's rejection of Sheen was rooted in foresight. He knew that Sheen's career wouldn't end in applause. It would end in flames. And so, Freeman made sure his name would never be tied to Sheen's legacy. For a man who built his reputation on grace, composure, and professionalism, aligning with someone whose brand was chaos was unthinkable. Hollywood thrives on drama, but Morgan Freeman had no interest in unnecessary explosions. By blacklisting Charlie Sheen, Freeman wasn't just protecting his own career, he was protecting the integrity of every film he chose to be a part of. And unlike many in Hollywood who gave Sheen chance after chance, Freeman never looked back. Of all the names on Morgan Freeman's silent blacklist, none surprised Hollywood more than Will Smith. Unlike Charlie Sheen, Smith wasn't reckless. Unlike Russell Crowe, he wasn't combative. Unlike Kevin Costner, he wasn't consumed by ego, at least not in the same obvious way. To the public, Will Smith was the golden boy of Hollywood, a blockbuster king, a family man, and a smiling, larger-than-life entertainer who seemed incapable of scandal. So why would Freeman, a man known for his fairness, distance himself from him? The answer wasn't scandal, it was philosophy. NFOR Freeman, acting was about truth. He believed every performance, no matter how grand, should come from a place of honesty. That's why his characters, even in fantasy or action roles, felt grounded and real. Freeman saw acting as art, an exploration of humanity itself. But in Will Smith, he saw something different. He saw a man who had traded that art for box office dominance. During the 1990s and 2000s, Smith carefully crafted his career around safe bets. He built his empire on action-packed blockbusters like Independence Day, Men in Black, and I, Robot. These movies made him one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. But to Freeman, they came at a cost: artistic depth. Insiders have long claimed that Freeman and Smith nearly worked together on multiple occasions, but Freeman pulled back each time. He reportedly told one producer, "He plays the movie star better than anyone alive. But playing the movie star isn't the same as playing the man." The difference between the two men couldn't have been starker. Freeman had spent decades clawing his way to the top through character-driven roles: prisoners, chauffeurs, detectives, flawed but deeply human men. His career was built on subtlety. Smith's was built on spectacle. Freeman didn't resent Smith's success, but he quietly rejected it. He believed Smith was a symbol of Hollywood's growing obsession with money over meaning. What deepened the rift, however, wasn't just artistic philosophy. It was Smith's carefully maintained image. Freeman, who despised pretension and dishonesty, reportedly saw cracks in the facade long before the public did. While fans adored Smith's family man persona, Freeman, ever the keen observer of human behavior, noticed the strain. Hollywood is full of whispers, and the whispers around Smith grew louder with each passing year. Marital troubles, control over his public narrative, a career built less on truth than on perfection. Then came the night of the Oscars in 2022. The world watched as Will Smith, once the industry's most likable star, walked onto the stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock in front of millions. For many, it was shocking. For Freeman, it was confirmation. The man who had spent decades polishing his image could not escape the truth forever. The mask had slipped. And Freeman, true to form, made no public comment. He didn't mock, he didn't gloat, he didn't even condemn. But those who know him say the incident only solidified his decision never to align himself with Smith. To Freeman, Smith's career symbolized what happens when Hollywood values celebrity over substance. It wasn't that Smith lacked talent. His performances in Ali and The Pursuit of Happiness proved he could deliver when he wanted to. But Freeman believed Smith too often chose fame over art, money over meaning, performance over truth. In a way, Smith's blacklist was perhaps the saddest of all. Unlike Sheen, he wasn't self-destructive. Unlike Gibson, he wasn't consumed by prejudice. Unlike Costner, he wasn't trying to erase others. Smith's crime, in Freeman's eyes, was subtler. He had all the tools to be great, but chose instead to be merely successful. Freeman built his career on a belief that film is about more than box office numbers. It is about the human soul. And in Will Smith, he saw a man who had turned his back on that belief. And that was enough for Freeman to quietly walk away. If there's one name on Morgan Freeman's blacklist that needs little explanation, it's Mel Gibson. By the mid-2000s, Gibson's reputation in Hollywood had been scorched by scandal. Anti-Semitic rants, racist outbursts, abusive behavior, and public meltdowns that made him one of the most controversial figures in the industry. But here's the twist. Freeman had written Gibson off long before the world did. NTO understand why. You have to look at the core differences between the two men. Freeman believed in humility, collaboration, and treating every member of a crew with equal dignity. Gibson, even at the height of his career, carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed he was above everyone else. His talent was undeniable. Braveheart won him Oscars for both directing and acting. But behind the camera, he had a reputation for being dismissive, volatile, and controlling. When Gibson and Freeman nearly crossed paths in the 1990s, the experience left Freeman with a lasting distaste. Reports from crew members painted a clear picture. Gibson often barked at assistants, dismissed input from others, and carried himself as though the set was his personal kingdom. Freeman, who commanded respect without ever raising his voice, saw this behavior as poison. For him, arrogance wasn't strength, it was weakness masquerading as authority. NTHE divide only deepened as Gibson's darker side came to light. In 2006, Gibson was arrested for drunk driving and unleashed a tirade of anti-Semitic remarks at the arresting officers. Later, recordings of Gibson's violent rants toward his former partner surfaced, revealing a man consumed by rage and prejudice. Hollywood recoiled, studios severed ties, and Gibson's once golden career crumbled. And Freeman, though silent as always, made his position known in private. He had no interest in working with Gibson before the scandals, and afterward, the decision was final. For Freeman, it wasn't just about professionalism anymore, it was about morality. Hollywood often forgives arrogance, sometimes even chaos, if the talent is strong enough. But bigotry and abuse? Those were unforgivable sins. What's fascinating is that both men had played roles that touched on faith, morality, and justice. Freeman had become iconic for his dignified portrayals. God in Bruce Almighty, the wise mentor in The Shawshank Redemption, the moral compass in $1 Million Baby. Gibson, meanwhile, leaned into grand, violent epics like The Passion of the Christ and Apocalypto. Where Freeman sought truth and humanity, Gibson seemed obsessed with spectacle and control. The contrast between them could not have been sharper. There's a story insiders tell about Freeman being asked if he would consider a project Gibson wanted to direct. Freeman reportedly declined without hesitation, saying something along the lines of, "I don't work for people who confuse cruelty with strength." It wasn't a direct insult, but those who knew the backstory didn't need clarification. NBY blacklisting Gibson. Freeman wasn't just drawing a professional line, he was making a moral statement. He had spent his career navigating an industry rife with discrimination, quietly pushing back against the barriers placed in front of him as a black man. To then turn around and align himself with someone openly spouting racism and hatred would have been a betrayal of everything he stood for. And so, Freeman cut Gibson off completely, not with drama, not with headlines, but with silence. That silence, in many ways, spoke louder than any interview ever could. Today, Gibson is slowly working his way back into Hollywood, directing films and even appearing in small roles. But for Morgan Freeman, the exile remains permanent. Talent, after all, can win awards. But dignity, the kind Freeman valued above all else, cannot be bought back once it's lost. In Freeman's world, Mel Gibson wasn't just another difficult star. He was the line in the sand. And Freeman made sure everyone knew he would never cross it. Of all the names on Morgan Freeman's blacklist, none shocked Hollywood more than Denzel Washington. Unlike Charlie Sheen, Denzel was not chaotic. Unlike Kevin Costner, he was not consumed by ego. And unlike Mel Gibson, he was not marred by scandal or prejudice. In fact, Denzel Washington has long been hailed as one of the most disciplined, talented, and respected actors of his generation, much like Freeman himself. So how could two men who seemed cut from the same cloth end up on opposite sides of an invisible line? NTHE answer lies in something far more complicated than arrogance or chaos. This was not a clash of character flaws. It was a clash of perfectionists. Freeman and Washington both rose to prominence as black actors in a Hollywood that wasn't built to make their rise easy. They fought their way through stereotypes, rejected one-dimensional roles, and demanded scripts that showed depth and dignity. Both became symbols of resilience and artistry. On paper, they should have been natural allies, maybe even lifelong collaborators. But in practice, their similarities created friction rather than unity. When Freeman and Washington were nearly paired together in the 1990s, expectations were sky high. Producers envisioned a powerhouse duo, two titans of the screen bringing gravitas to a story that could only be told through their combined weight. But behind the scenes, it quickly became clear that their working methods were worlds apart, and Freeman's style was fluid. He trusted the script, trusted his instincts, and let moments evolve naturally. He didn't force scenes, he let them breathe. Washington, on the other hand, was famously exacting. He drilled lines with military precision, dissected every detail, and demanded absolute control over the emotional beats of his characters. For some actors, Washington's intensity was inspiring. For Freeman, it was suffocating. And one insider once put it bluntly, "You can't have two generals leading the same army." Reports suggest that on set, the tension was palpable. Freeman would suggest a looser interpretation of a scene, while Washington would push for rigid precision. Neither man was wrong, but neither could bend enough to accommodate the other. It wasn't shouting matches or public blow-ups. It was quieter than that, colder. Two men of immense respect and talent, silently realizing that their visions of art were simply incompatible. And unlike with other actors on Freeman's blacklist, there was no redemption arc, no chance of trying again later. After that near collaboration, both men stepped back, and the unspoken agreement was clear. They would never work together again. NTO outsiders. It was baffling. Why would two legends not seize the chance to share the screen? But for Freeman, the answer was simple. He valued harmony on set above all else. He had no interest in turning filmmaking into a battlefield. Even if Washington wasn't disrespectful or chaotic, the energy was wrong. And Freeman, a man who built his career on patience and discipline, refused to force something that didn't fit. What makes this particular blacklist entry so fascinating is its lack of scandal. With Murphy, there was chaos. With Crowe, there was arrogance. With Sheen, there was danger. With Gibson, there was prejudice. But with Washington, there was only incompatibility. Two artists so fiercely committed to their craft that they couldn't share the same stage. And yet, that quiet fallout may reveal more about Freeman than any other feud. It showed that for him, the blacklist wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. He didn't blacklist Washington because of betrayal or bad behavior. He did it because he knew his own limits, and he respected the craft enough to step aside rather than force a false collaboration. NTO this day, the absence of a Freeman Washington film is one of Hollywood's greatest what-ifs. Fans wonder what might have been. Two voices of thunder, two men of towering presence, delivering lines that would have echoed through generations. But for Freeman, the cost of that collision was too high, and so he chose dignity over spectacle, as he always did. And in the end, Denzel Washington's place on Freeman's blacklist is not a story of anger, but of respect, the rare kind of respect that knows when to walk away.